The limo slowed as the chatter inside was silenced by the sudden appearance of a hotel building. Like everything in the heaven realm, it was beautiful. It was in the form of a rectangle with circular edges. The building was encased in pearly mirror glass, aside from gold trimming that outlined each window. There was a golden hedgestone that was positioned outside the front of the building that read, "The Eden Hotel." "So this is where we'll be staying?" I asked, turning toward Jade. Sam turned around at the sound of my words. He climbed on the seat and rested his knees on the cushion, weighing down the plush leather as he stared out the window. "Man, this place is huge," he uttered, staring in awe. "Well, it houses over 140,000 of the top recruits in the heaven realm," Jade replied. Sai sat forward with an inquisitive look on her face, intrigued by his words. "So this place is where everyone competing in the trials will stay?" she asked, pointing behind her head at the building. "No, not all the prospects. There are thousands of hotels. This is just the most sought-after destination. It's one of the perks of being with the top agencies. The size is mostly used for the administrative personnel. This place is used for orientation, testing, press conferences, the MedCorps, and even practice facilities for the trials," Max answered. "Stuff like that takes up a lot of room." As he spoke, I made my way over to Sam. I propped myself on the seat to get a better look. I saw a herd of kids that ranged from our age to teenagers heading toward the front entrance. I could feel the tension in the pit of my stomach. I stared at the huge prospects we would be competing against. I couldn't fight the building butterflies in the pit of my stomach. I survey our competition, trying to remain composed as doubt slowly began to creep into my mind. "Those guys are huge, and man, is that thing even human? It looks like some type of monkey-like giant," Pete responded. He scooted next to me as I stared out the window. I was so occupied with the competition that I didn't even notice he and Sai on either side of me. "What in the world is that?" Eve blurted. She was on the other side of the car, pointing into the street. There was a line of cars that seemed to go on forever. Beings from all walks of life exited from funny-looking vehicles and headed toward the hotel. I gasped at the way some of them looked. They were all humanoid, but with slight variations. Some had the features of animals. Others had features I had never seen before, but none were abnormal-looking. They were all beautiful human-like creatures. The variations were slight. If you saw them among normal people, you would probably assume they were human with some type of small birth defect. "What is that thing?" Luke let out. He was pointing at a being that was covered in dark gorilla-like hair, with glowing green tiger stripes running through the fur-like hair. The fur was striped like a tiger, but the stripes looked more like tattoos on his rippling muscles. He had long black hair and eyes like a cat. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it looks mean," Eve replied. "He's called a Goranoid, or a Goran," Max replied. "They're very powerful beings, but he's probably more afraid of you than you are of him. They see humans like humans see angels. They are a rather young species, and are extremely peaceful. They are one of the favored worlds, but they, like every other species in existence, are below humans, so like most other species, they are intimidated by you." "Well, that's good to know," Beth replied. "Yeah, we had to go to their homeworld for a mission. My dad, me, and Zek destroyed a whole army of them in one day," Joe stated proudly. "You mean I destroyed a whole army of them?" Zek intervened. "I helped," Joe replied. "Barely. Mom told you to stay, but you just had to go because I was going," Zek chastised. "What happened?" Sai asked, staring at the two of them. "He got sick. He had been sick all week," Zek replied, to our amazement. "Sick? I thought people didn't get sick in heaven," I replied, turning to Jade. "They don't, but if they are taken, like Danielle, sometimes their spirit can be fed on, and it may take time for them to recover," he replied. "You mean like kidnapped?" Sai replied. Lightborns are an excellent source of spirit energy, and Joe was captured for close to a week before his brother destroyed a small remote base and rescued him," Jade replied, patting Zack on his head lovingly. "After that, it takes a while for them to regain their strength by being in the presence of the Lord. Joe was in no condition to be on a mission, but Zack here snuck him out and ended up paying for it as a battle broke out. Joe was almost captured again, but I'll give them credit. For pre-service recruits their age, they put on one heaven of a show. They barely got out." "I thought you said these guys were peaceful," Uriah asked. "Well, yeah, but like everybody else, just because one person is good, it doesn't mean everyone is. For the most part, they are extremely peaceful people, and God's favor dwells with them. But just like on Earth, some people who believe and some people who don't," Jade replied. "The people who don't, they begin to persecute God's people. When that happens, Father Yahweh intervenes." I turned back to the window. I watched as the recruits funneled into the entrance doors. I was still intimidated. I couldn't believe it. After spending the better part of a month on a topsy-turvy trip, we were finally at the trials. "Okay, grab your things and let's go," Max replied, opening the limo door. My stomach was in my throat. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. I stared at my legion, sarcastically pleading for clarity for their actions. "You guys do know just because I picked the legions, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't enter the hotel without me," I said in a last-ditch effort to urge them forward. "What's the difference? Just go, Tim," Jacob ordered, pushing me forward. I gripped my backpack to lessen the tension in the pit of my stomach. I stepped out into the warm air. We made our way down a walkway as the groups of legions spread like the Red Sea. A girl stopped and pointed in my direction, and a ripple effect seemed to turn every eye toward us. "Anybody feel as awkward as I do right now?" Eve uttered. Everyone continued to move to the side as we made our way to the entrance. They all stared at us. At first glance, some of the legions looked intrigued, but others looked as if they couldn't stand the sight of us. I stared forward, nervous, trying my best not to make direct eye contact with anyone. "Okay," Pete whispered ominously. "I know I have a tendency to be a little neurotic, but it seems like every person at this place is looking at us." "It's definitely not you," Sai replied, staring forward, obviously uncomfortable. My heart was beating out of my chest as their eyes pierced the side of my head. We couldn't get to the entrance fast enough. "Just keep moving," Jacob ordered, shoving me forward. "If it isn't the media darlings," one voice said. "They don't look so tough," another voice chimed in. "See you in the simulations. We're going to kick your butts," screamed another voice. The whole crowd began to laugh hysterically. We all looked like the new kids in school that no one liked. I didn't know a lot about the Heaven Realm, but I knew enough to know we were about as accepted as a bad rash. "Oh yeah?" Sam fired back aggressively, turning toward the sound of the voice. "Shut up, Sam," Sai shot under her breath, pushing him forward. "Yeah, what is that going to do?" Eve added. "Let's just get out of this zoo." As we approached the entrance, a kid stood leaning against the door, blocking the double doors. I exhaled as I stopped, anticipating trouble. "There's a toll, pipsqueak," he warned, looking at me before turning to the crowd, chuckling arrogantly. "Dude, move," I demanded, my patience running thin. He reached to grab me, but before I could react, Jacob was standing in front of me. He had the kid's hand before we knew what happened. It was faint, but I could see the hint of light in his eyes. "Oh, who are you, his babysitter?" the kid jabbed, unaffected by Jacob's sudden appearance. "You know exactly who I am," he replied, staring at the kid sternly. "And if you ever raise your hand to my little brother again, you'll lose it." "The big bad Jacob Eli," the kid responded with a mischievous smile. "You think you're some type of hotshot because you beat some nobody demons. You're all talk. That's the thing with you Elis. You never know when to keep your mouth shut." As he spoke, his right hand began to change into a metallic state. He leaned back as if he was preparing to strike, but before he could, Jacob flexed, and with a mere clenching of his fists, a power emitted from his body that was so strong that it sent the kid reeling across the sidewalk. It had all happened so suddenly that I barely caught it. I could feel the heat on my face as the light emitted from Jacob's body. I couldn't understand how he could emit that type of power with no collateral damage. The kid was the only one to feel the negative effects. Jacob was more powerful than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just the power, but the control as well. He was scary. "Are you kidding me?" Pete uttered, staring at the wreck in awe. We were all standing with our mouths open, blown away by Jacob's display of power. "Awesome!" the twins added simultaneously. Whatever you want to call the attitude of the crowd before the incident, it changed. They were no longer laughing, and all the looks of aggression were now replaced with pondering looks of hesitation and intimidation. They all looked at Jacob, petrified. He surveyed the crowd as he motioned for us to enter the building. I stopped to look back. He grimaced before shoving me with one hand. "Tim, get inside," he shot, staring me up and down. The kid stumbled to his feet as another one of the recruits helped balance him out. I smirked as I tossed my bag over my shoulder. He stared at me angrily before turning to Jacob. At that moment, not only did we learn a little more about the power my brother possessed, but so did every recruit there. And I don't care how good they were. To see a guy get beat with a clinch of the wrist was ridiculous, even for them. He was downright terrifying in that moment, and I was the guy he was protecting. "Theta Delta, remember that," Luke mocked, turning to the crowd. "Who's up for the simulator now?" "Okay, let's go," Sai added, pushing him forward. I stood next to the door as the rest of the Legion entered. Max and Jade followed up the sidewalk. They surveyed the scenery and turned toward us as with an inquiring look. "Tim, what happened?" Jade accused, pointing to the kid. "Hey, I didn't do anything. I just tried to enter the building and Butch Bully over here started in with me. Jacob kind of stepped in and finished things," I responded. "Jacob, you didn't," Max replied. "Great. This is exactly what we needed. They already think Earthborns are brutes, and we go in and get into a fight as soon as we touch the trial grounds. Don't tell me you attacked him." "I didn't touch the kid," Jacob responded, throwing his bag over his shoulder as he walked into the building. Max stared at him, shaking his head before turning toward the crowd, then back toward me. "What happened?" Jade asked. "I told you. I wanted to go into the building, the kid blocked me, and before I knew it, Jacob was standing in front of me. The kid tried to attack, and Jacob sent him flying," I replied. "What do you mean, sent him flying?" he pressed. "I don't know. He just flexed, and the kid flew across the lawn," I replied. "Like he said, he didn't even touch the guy. It was his faith energy. I don't know what he did, but it was powerful." He surveyed me as if he was a human lie detector. He then turned toward Max, who was still staring at the kid. He still hadn't recovered from Jacob's attack. He was now sitting surrounded by a group of recruits, but it seemed like his pride was more hurt than anything else. "Well, this is starting off on the right foot, isn't it?" he mourned, typing a couple of notes into his watch. "All right, let's go." He motioned for me to go inside with an agitated look on his face. I gauged the demeanor of the recruits one last time before turning to go in. Max was right. They looked at us like we were a bunch of wild bikers. "Sorry," I apologized, raising my hand in surrender. "We're really not bad people." It was all I managed to get out before Jade jerked me inside the door like a bad comic at the Apollo. "What?" I replied. "I was just trying to smooth things over." He looked at me with a condemning glare. "Tim, I've seen you try to smooth things over in the past," he replied. I think we're better off leaving it to Father Yahweh's will. Now go catch up with the others." "Hey," I replied, embarrassed. "Come on." "Tim, go," he replied, pointing me toward the rest of the Legion. I fixed my backpack, then headed toward everyone. I dodged and sliced my way through the students who were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. It was like the gymnasium on the first day of school. Kids were running around lost as Jade guided me over to my friends. "We're the Theta Delta Legion. We're checking in for the Light Guard trials," Max announced, walking up to the counter. There were windows with lit-up signs above them that read check-in. They looked like normal hotel counters outside of the sheer number of them. A lady with dark black hair and glasses stared at the screen before looking up as Max spoke to her. "Yes, you are," she said with an adoring smile. "Look at you. My husband and I have followed every story that has aired on you guys. It's just God's grace that I ended up being your clerk." She typed a couple words on her computer as a hologram began to form in the shape of a weird signal. "Okay, Theta Delta, this will be your pass throughout the next 2 weeks here," she replied. As she tapped the hologram, it dispersed like a laser into the symbols on our chest and watches. A warm feeling came over me as I could feel the light scanning me up and down like a probe before disappearing back into the symbol on my chest. "That's odd," she replied, staring at her computer screen. "Our readings seem to be off." "No, they're not," Max replied. "They're not in their resurrected forms. These are still their earthborn bodies." She looked us over and hesitated before forcing a smile. "Well, we haven't had true Earthborns appear in the trials in quite some time," she replied. "But from what I have heard and seen from you guys, I bet you'll make things just as interesting as the last time." She started to type once again as we stood, waiting for her to look up again. "What did she mean by Earthborn bodies?" Sam questioned. Max ignored the question as he continued to type on his watch. Jade looked over hesitantly before answering the question. "It's simple, really. Normally, once people die, they come here and are given their Lightborn body. But since you guys have to go back and haven't technically died yet, you have to compete in your Earthborn bodies," he replied. "That's odd," I replied. "Why do they seem so much weaker in our realm?" "Well, these are the same bodies you had in the Earth realm, but in the Heaven realm your spirit is strong. That makes every cell stronger. So here you're more powerful than you would be in your home realm, so your bodies are lighter. Unfortunately, the reverse is true as well," he explained, moving his hands in a weighing manner. "That same energy is choked out in the Earth realm. This causes you guys to exert more energy than you normally would in the Heaven realm." "And there, you're all set up," the lady replied. "You're going to be in 3 separate rooms. Jacob, Luke, and Uriah will be in 3D, Peter, Samuel, and Timothy will be in 3E, and the girls, Sarai, Bethany, Danielle, and Evelyn will be in 3F. All your rooms will be on the 3rd floor, aside from the twins who will be staying in the junior quarters on the 1st level. Your orientation is in the morning at 7:30. All competing legions will also be meeting tonight for your press conferences. You're scheduled on stage 408 at 7:30. Also, Maxiel and Jadiel, since you're their host, we need all their interviews and appointments disclosed beforehand. They all have to be approved by the council before they can be scheduled." Jade nodded in approval. She typed as the spinning hologram dispersed into Jade's watch. She typed another couple of numbers as another hologram dispersed into our watches. "Thank you," Max replied. "No problem," she said, smiling. "And I'll be your hotel concierge while you're staying here. My name is Ruth Gabriel, and if you have any questions about anything, just come to me. Enjoy your stay at Eden Hotel." We all nodded at various times as we turned to leave. Max stopped us to give us further instructions. I felt like I was at one of my dad's conventions. My ADHD was starting to kick in as my mind wandered, staring at all the commotion going on around us. "Now you guys head up to your room while we set up your registration down here. Go up and get settled in. Like she said, Jacob, Luke, and Uriah will be in one room, Tim, Pete, and Sam will be in one, and the girls will be in the final room. Twins, you'll be with me and Jade. Now to the rest of you, your room doors will only open for its assigned occupants. Just walk up to the scanner and the doors should unlock automatically. The doors are portals. Your room will serve as your training environment, dining area, and sleeping quarters. You will be free to move about the hotel freely, but you cannot leave without our permission, or you risk being disqualified from the trials. Oh yeah, and no more fighting. Now, do you guys have any questions? We all shook our heads no. He nodded in approval as he headed back toward the desk to meet back up with Jade and Ruth. A man stood next to a door, signaling for us to come over. Are we supposed to head over to that guy? I asked suspiciously. Yeah, I think he's the doorman, Sai responded. I hesitantly headed toward him as he stopped motioning. He wore a friendly smile with his arms crossed in front of him. Hi, Theta Delta, I'm Leo Carroll, and I will be your portal mechanic. If you need to go to interviews, appearances, or anything like that, I'll be your pilot, he said, shaking each of our hands one by one. Thanks, sir, Jacob replied. We're just heading up to our rooms. Okay, no problem. Let me just type in your coordinates, he replied, hitting some numbers on his watch. A faint beam of light started off as a small dot before exploding into a wormhole. Okay, you're all set. Just step right through and you'll be on your floor, he said, signaling us through. Thank you, we all replied in various ways. We walked through and immediately we were standing in a long hallway with angelic writing on each of them. Great, it's in Heaven Realm writing, Luke complained. Well, Max said that they should open automatically, I responded. I guess we should just head down the hall and see which door opens first. Eve walked forward, running her hand along the wall. That seems like a waste of time in a place like this, don't you think? Shouldn't there be like an arrow or something, like it was in the woods? She asked, surveying the strange hallway. No, I don't think that was technology. I think it was subatomics, Pete responded. I think it was the dwarf doing it for all of us. Besides, I don't think they know we don't read angelic. Well, unless anybody has a better plan, I say we walk down the hall and see what happens, Luke responded. We all cautiously headed forward. It didn't take long for the first door to react. We hadn't taken more than 1 or 2 steps before a laser shot out and locked on Jacob, Luke, and Uriah. The rest of us moved out of the way as the light locked on the 3 of them. It started out covering their whole body before converging around their eyes. A beep sounded as the door opened. Swanky, Luke let out, walking forward. Oh yeah, this is nice, Uriah seconded. Jacob nodded excitedly as he disappeared into the room behind them. Oh, let me see, Sam let out, walking toward the door. Before he could come within a foot of it, the door slammed automatically. Well, that's efficient, Eve responded with a laugh. Jacob stuck his head back outside the door, showing an apologetic smirk. His eyes were telling us to get lost before we could ask what was going on. Come on, Jake, I want to kick your butt before we go down to the press conference, Luke screamed from inside the room. Yeah, Jacob responded. I'm coming, just hold on a second. What is he talking about? Sai questioned, trying to look into the room. You'll see, Jacob responded with a smile. You guys go ahead. We'll meet back outside here just before the conference. Okay, are we supposed to just keep going? I responded with a curious nod. Good, Tim, that would be a productive idea, he shot, slamming the door, rolling his eyes sarcastically. The sudden slamming of the door caused us to jerk. That was weird, I responded sarcastically. Was it me, or did they seem like they were shooing us away? No, Jacob and Luke, Sai responded, echoing my sarcasm. Let's just keep going. We stopped and scanned the rest of the hotel. Well, if theirs is 3D, then the next one should be you guys? Eve deducted, looking around trying to read the strange letters. As she spoke, a beam shot out from either side of us. On one side of the hall, the light from a door locked on me, Pete, and Sam. On the other side of the hall, a door locked on the girls. "I guess we're neighbors," she added with a smile. "I guess so," I responded, with nothing better to say. Sai shot me a teasing glance before turning toward their door. "All right, well, I guess we'll see you guys in a little while," Beth responded. "Okay," Pete responded. "Yeah, see you guys," I responded as the door finally opened. "Don't get lost," Eve said, just as she walked into the room behind Sai and Beth. "This is so cool, it feels like summer camp," Sai responded, running in after them. We could hear their screams of excitement as their door closed behind them. "I guess they liked their room," I responded. "I guess so," Pete agreed with a chuckle. "Well, do you want to do the honors, Sam?" His words caught me off guard. His temperament was more respectful to Sam since Eve's outburst on the bus. I could still sense the tension, but even though he never said it, it was almost like he was trying to give Sam a do-over. "Okay, cool," Sam replied with a smile. "The last one in is a rotten leg." Pete and I snickered as we followed him into light, revealing the other side of the room. "Well, as much as I expect from this place, it still finds a way to surprise me with its sheer extravagance," Pete shot, blown away by the scenery. "Look at this place." The door opened and my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The inside of the room was bigger and more luxurious than my home, and that was saying something. I touched and prodded to make sure it was all real. I was sure it was a mirage. Needless to say, I wouldn't be sharing a restroom. "Wow, look at this gym," Sam uttered from across the house. I followed his voice over to where he was standing. It was rigged with light yellow sensors that outlined each wall up and down. It wasn't like any gym I had seen before. There were sensors, lasers, and cameras all over the place. The ground was a hard glass-like material that seemed to vibrate and ripple almost like water with every step we took on it. "How do you know it's a gym?" I asked, looking at him. "The lines. Oh yeah, and check this out," he said with a smile. "The training site we used to practice at with Jade." The room slowly started to change. It expanded and morphed until it was the exact replica of our training location. I walked over and touched the water. It rippled against my open palm as I smiled, looking up at Sam. "How did you do that?" I asked him. "Jade, he taught me. You know, when you guys were in the trailer," he responded. "But how did you know that you could do it here?" I continued. "Like I said, the lines running on the walls. You remember when we first arrived in the lab?" he asked, pointing to the vibrant glowing lights surrounding the room. "Yeah," I said, with my gaze following his pointing finger. "Well, it had those sensor things on the wall as well," he said, pointing to either side of him. I was so surprised. He was a living, breathing mammal. With his competitive streak, I was beginning to wonder if he had a non-competitive thought in his head. The bar was embarrassingly low, but I was still impressed that he was that observant. "Cool," I said with a smile. Angel Haven Middle. The room began to morph once more. I watched in awe like a kid with a shiny new toy. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of Ms. Munoz's room. "A lot has changed since we were last here," Pete chimed in, leaning against Ms. Munoz's desk. I hadn't noticed his presence until he spoke. He walked over to his assigned seat and settled in. He looked forward as if to be trying to visualize his former self. Sam and I followed suit, plopping in our assigned seats. "Life was a lot simpler then," Pete said, leaning back in his chair. "You got that right," Sam responded. "My one goal was to become like Jacob and marry Sai." Pete's eyes cut from the minute he heard Sai's name. I laughed out loud at the irony. "What?" Sam responded in an offended tone. "What, do you think I can't get her?" "Well, no, I don't think you could get her, but that's not what I meant," I said sarcastically. "It just seems like you and Pete are more alike than I originally thought." His gaze turned to Pete as a smile began to form on his face. "You're kidding," he laughed. You like Psy too? Pete looked at me with an exasperated stare before falling back into his seat, noticeably agitated.
Tim, I'm going to kill you. No joke. I am literally going to leap over this desk and kill you. You tell Sam of all people.
I put my hands in the air apologetically. I chuckled in a low, controlled tone, not missing the opportunity to pay Pete back for the scene in my bedroom a couple weeks earlier. What? Come on, it's funny. What do you want me to do? I replied, mimicking his voice from weeks earlier. You remember that sentiment, don't you? Pete shook his head, pointing at me with a cynical, accepting smile. Sam's gaze went back and forth, bewildered.
Come on, I'm not going to say anything to her, he added. I just never knew. I mean, it makes sense. What makes sense? Pete replied defensively. No, I mean, she's always talking about how good of a friend you are, Sam replied quickly. It just makes sense now. I'm a friend to her because she's a friend to me, not because I like her, Pete replied. Sure, I mocked, causing him to chunk a balled up paper at my head. I'm not saying you are, but it makes things a lot easier, Sam continued over our interaction. I mean, she's obviously hot, but so are a lot of other girls. There has to be a reason other than that. I mean, you treat her like a princess. It's a little much at times. I've never seen anyone act like that toward a girl. I just always thought there was something there. Pete stared at me with a hesitant pause before shaking his head in a relenting manner. Sam was right to be suspicious, but Pete was like that with all his friends. Once you got on his good side, the guy was fiercely loyal. Of course, he was especially nice to Psy, and I had to believe at least some of it was due to his affection for her. I don't know, he said, shrugging his shoulder. I guess it's not one thing, it's everything about her. How caring she is, how smart she is, the way she tries to find the good in everyone and everything. I don't know when it started, but for as long as I can remember, I've just been attracted to her. I looked at Sam, smiling at the sappy explanation. I pretended to be playing the harp until Pete playfully shoved me. Stop, Tim, I'm serious, man, Pete replied, blushing red with embarrassment. I was just going to say she was cute and I liked the way she dressed, Sam replied, causing me to chuckle louder. Naturally, I followed sarcastically, but as a fairly decent friend, I have to recommend you leave her to Pete. He paused with a smile. Agreed, he replied, finally starting to pick up on my sarcastic personality. Pete's face perked up as a smile came across his face. I don't need you to give her to me, he covered, laughing at the gesture. Of course not. Can't you see he's known Psy since he was 5 and has done literally nothing to let her know he's into her? I interrupted sarcastically. Does that sound like someone who needs help? Shut up, Tim, I'm serious about this, he replied, fixing his glasses coyly. No, I'm not saying I'll give her to you, Sam replied. I know I mess with her a lot, but Psy means a lot to me. She's been the closest friend I've ever had, and as her friend, I just want what's best for her. You seem like you really care about her, so I'm done. Pete looked confused as he stared at Sam, trying to make sense of what was going on. You just said your dream was to marry her, Pete shot with a raised eyebrow. Well, dreams change. Besides, she doesn't seem interested in me in that way anyway, Sam explained. No, I replied sarcastically. You mean the punches and constant anger isn't a sign of love? Sam rolled his eyes and grabbed his stomach, sarcastically faking laughter. You never run out, do you? He replied. No, I make it my duty to keep the cupboard full for situations just like this, I replied with a smile. Ignoring the comedian Eli over here, I'll continue. I'm not saying I did you any type of charity. I'm saying, if I'm honest with myself, I'm not sure I like her in that way either, Sam continued. So I figured I'd save her the headache and leave her to you. Can I get that in writing? I continued. He surprised me. He wasn't acting like the Sam I knew. There was a tame demeanor to him. I wondered if it had anything to do with the realm, but that wouldn't make any sense.
I felt like the same me, even though I had become more mature. It wasn't the vast personality change Sam was exhibiting. It was almost like he was sucking up. "Thanks, I guess," Pete replied, his guard still up.
"What?" Sam replied. "I thought you'd be happy. I know I'm not big competition, but I'm still competition all the same."
He wore a playful smile that was eerily cheery.
"Oh, no,"
Pete replied, smiling uneasily.
"I guess I'm just so used to you being obnoxious. No offense."
Sam stared forward before forcing a smile.
"I don't think you're that way now, I guess," Pete apologized. "But old impressions die hard, you know?"
Sam nodded with a smile. I wasn't going to say anything, and I know it's really none of my business, but since Pete brought it up, what is up with this new attitude? I blurted out, finally bearing my haunting thoughts. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly. It was like our gaze was burning a hole into the side of his head. I could tell from his demeanor that he wanted us to drop it. He looked at the vacant blackboard as he replied.
"I don't know what you're talking about,"
he groaned stubbornly. His demeanor stiffened as he spoke. I wanted to just let it go, but it was a question that I needed to be answered, and he was the only one who could answer it. "Come on, Sam. I've never seen you take shots from, well, anyone. The twins, Jade and Max, insulting you like they did, even me and my actions. Why aren't you blowing your stack?" I blurted. "I don't mind you controlling your emotions, but the way you're acting, it's like you're acting. It seems like it's not really you." He stood in silence, still staring at the board, impatiently strumming his fingers on his desk. Pete looked at me with an inquiring stare. He could tell that my concern had a self-satisfying motivation. I went to speak again, but before I could, Sam responded to my query.
"Why do you care?"
he snapped. His words caught me off guard. I didn't want to say it out loud, but it should have been obvious. I felt responsible for what had happened to him. It was eating away at me. He wasn't reacting in a way that would penalize me. Deep down, I wanted him to embarrass me. I wanted the punishment. It was what I deserved. "I don't know. It's just, I want you to be comfortable being you," I shielded, self-consciously looking away. He paused before turning to me with a serious glare.
"Well, you have a funny way of showing it,"
he cut, leaning back as his frustration toward me started to build. "What does that mean?" I shot, offended.
"Nothing. Look, you guys don't even know me," he replied, glaring at me as if he was looking through me. "So how do you know? And so what? Maybe it isn't, but the old Sam wasn't doing me any favors. Besides, you guys are always telling me to grow up. Maybe I'm just tired of everyone hating me."
I paused, finally coming to a realization. He was doing all this to shield himself. It wasn't until I reminisced on our stay that everything came rushing back. From the moment he arrived, we all treated him like an outsider, like he didn't belong, and in a lot of cases, we didn't think he did. I was so used to Sam being so thick-skinned, I never recognized it bothered him so much. I just figured he was used to it.
"Nobody hates you, Sam," Pete responded.
"Yeah," I added. He paused before staring down at the ground.
"Well, I have friends for the first time in a long time. I'm not going to mess that up," he replied with a sorrowful demeanor. "It's how you guys act toward each other. I figured you guys liked girly, caring stuff."
I couldn't believe he was actually pretending the whole time. He hadn't changed. He was just acting the way he thought we wanted him to act. He was so good that I wondered if I had ever known the real Sam. If he could pull off the charade he did so effortlessly, then his personality from the moment I met him could have been an act.
"That's ridiculous," Pete replied. "If it's not your personality, they'll see right through it. A part of being a friend is being honest and letting people see you for who you are. They can't do that if you're not being yourself."
He pretended to play a violin as he mocked Pete's words.
"Yeah, and bad things don't happen to good people. Good kids get good parents, and hearts are made of gummy bears and gumdrops. Come on, that's not true and you know it. People like people who act like they do. And if you act like they do, they accept you. If you don't, you're an outsider. Let's be real. You were lucky enough to find friends like Tim and Sai who embraced you. That's not how it usually is. Trust me, I know. Even now, I tried being myself, and I ended up knocked out on the side of the battlefield, he replied. His words were like a punch in the gut. I cringed as they echoed in my mind before I fumbled to clarify. Sam, you're right, that was on me, I quickly replied, finally ready to explain my actions. It had nothing to do with... Can we just drop it, Tim? I don't want to talk about what happened, okay? He screamed before I could even finish my explanation. I wanted to let it pass, but I couldn't. I needed to set things right. I needed to let him know I was sorry. I paused for a second, then forced myself to speak. Sam, I made a mistake, I replied, ignoring his request. And you're right, but that doesn't make you a jerk. It makes me one. I can't take back what happened, but you're my friend, and I promise that I'll accept you no matter what you do, and not because I owe you, but because you're a good friend to have. Sam nodded, accepting my apology. Pete exhaled as if to be forcing himself to speak. I'm not perfect, and you're right. I found good friends who accepted me for who I am, and you know what? Maybe you've found that now. So if you're loud, obnoxious, and passionate, be that, and we'll get angry, make jokes, and at times do dumb things like Tim did. But that doesn't mean we're not your friends. We're all getting to know each other, and we're doing it on the fly. But in the long run, friendships are built, they're not given. Sam stood in silence before nodding in appreciation. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, he replied, rising from his seat. I'm not really used to the whole friend dynamic yet. It takes a while to get used to. If you guys don't mind, I just need to think about it for a little while. Pete and I nodded, empathetic to his quandary. He rose and walked out of the classroom, as Pete and I tried to catch our bearings. So, I said, trying to change the subject, how is this thing a training room? I looked around, moving the chairs around my desk in an attempt to make room. L Training Ground, I replied. The scenery returned to its former form, revealing Sam. He stared out at the sea and headed back toward the shoreline. He dropped to his knees. The water crashed against his legs as he stared out into the sea. So, who's up first? I prodded. Let's see what you guys got. Sam ignored me as he continued to stare out into the vacant body of water. I figured I'd let him come around in his own time. Pete removed his shoes as he replied. Okay, he let out, dropping his bag. Let's have a quick sparring match. I paused to make sure he was serious. He got into fighting stance and pivoted from foot to foot, anticipating an attack. You've got to be kidding me? I was just joking around. I wanted to train, but not against each other, I responded. You want to kill each other before the trial even begins? No, it's just sparring, and even if it gets crazy, I can heal people, so as long as the injuries are external, we'll be fine, he replied. Since when? I replied, astonished. Since we became anointed, he replied. I'm a law-vert, remember? Sam and I could have used some of those skills, Mr. Law-vert. Where were you when we were out of commission? I jabbed. I can only heal physical things with laws, he replied. You both had internal injuries originating in your brain. Okay, well, let's go then, I replied, up for anything. If you're down to go for a few rounds, I'm up for it. I made my way over to him. He waved his hand as the ground began to change. It took on a glassy-like form. The change was so sudden it knocked me off balance. I quickly caught my balance and jumped into fighting stance. Come on, give me a heads up, Pete, I complained, balancing my stances out. A sly smile covered his face as he got into a fighting stance of his own. Sorry, I was just trying something out, he replied, still wearing the sly smile. This anointment is ridiculous. I moved backwards cautiously. I could tell he had something planned. I found soft sand and prepared to spar.
Thanks for rubbing it in, I joked, still keeping my eye on him. He relaxed his stance and moved cautiously to my right. We were both carefully measuring each other. I was used to sparring with Eve and Sam, but cognitively, Pete was on a whole other level. He was going to test me, and I knew it. Pete was a genius at strategy, but he was at a disadvantage. There were too many unknown variables.
Oh yeah, I forgot you weren't able to do yours,
he apologized. He watched me, carefully gauging. He followed me like a predator stalking its prey. He was a long-range fighter. I knew as long as we had the distance between us, I was at a disadvantage. I needed to find an opening. I figured I would bait him to gain ground for an attack. I got anointed, I objected. I just didn't get to do the memory thing. I knew all I needed was a glancing moment. A blink would be enough. His response would be more than enough of an opening for me to attack.
Well, that being said, do you think this is a good idea? He asked. Isn't it kind of a handicap?
Before he could finish his statement, I was standing behind. His reflexes were unreal. Before I could so much as breathe, he had his fist pointing in my direction. It rested inches from my face in a non-threatening extension.
You have got to be a little sprier to catch me off guard, he replied.
Touché, I said with a smile. But getting close to you was my ultimate goal. Before he could blink, I dematerialized and shot past him. My sudden disappearance threw his defense off slightly. I knew I had the opening I was looking for. His shoulder dropped slightly, exposing his lower jaw. It was all I needed. I flipped backward as he attacked forward, causing his already lowered guard to dip wide enough for me to attack. Gotcha, Petey, I mocked with a smile. His arm went up instinctively, but it was a guessing measure, and he guessed wrong. He blocked low as I went in for the kill.
Huh?
He replied, confused. Before he knew what was happening, I landed a helicopter-like roundhouse that sent him to his knees. I ricocheted off his back and leaped high into the air. I gathered myself and shot myself like a torpedo using the wind around me. I crashed hard into the sand as he narrowly dodged my follow-up attack.
Ouch!
He screamed, putting a hand up signaling for me to stop. I paused regretfully. Had I gone too far? Pete jumped up and down, wincing in pain as I made my way toward him. What? I replied sympathetically. Are you all right? He fell to his butt, grabbing his shoulder in pain. As I approached him, I could see his shoulder was knocked so far out of place that he was literally holding it in place with his hand.
Ah!
He continued in agony.
Well, as you can see, I'm going to need a second.
I covered my eyes as he jammed it back into place. He shrieked so loud he caught Sam's attention. What's going on? He inquired, making his way over to us. Pete leaned back, still wincing. His eyes were red as he fought back obvious pain. I felt bad as I empathetically watched, afraid to touch him. Are you going to be okay? I replied regretfully. He nodded his head as he continued to move his arm around, as if to be trying to place it perfectly.
It's fine. I just have to,
he replied. His eyes lit up as a light emanated from his hand. He winced as he repaired his shoulder. I recognized the light from our time training with Jade. He was in obvious pain. Man, did I really hit you that hard? I replied remorsefully. He finally stood upright. He moved his shoulder around effortlessly. He opened his palm and flexed his fingers as if to be checking to see if everything was working properly.
Yeah, I tried to lure you in by leaving myself open. I was trying to set you up for my reverse gravitational push, but for some reason it didn't work. It didn't have any effect on you, he replied, shaking his hand as if he was just getting his feeling back. It was surprising. He was baiting me the whole time. I stared at him, shaking my head. Well, you weren't the only one with a few tricks up your sleeve, I replied. My attacks are elemental. Jade taught me a few techniques a couple of weeks ago. I knew about your gravitational push and pull subatomic art.
I used forced wind to strike. With my superhuman strength, you need pretty dense gravity to block or counterstrike. He pulled up the holographic interface screen on his watch. After typing what I perceived to be a couple of notes, he stood up and smiled.
Well, good thing we have this time. I can adjust my defense, just in case I run into another elemental, he replied.
I should have probably taken his cue and typed notes as well, but with my photographic memory, I was confident I didn't need to. Yeah, same here, I replied. I need to be more mindful of obvious openings and learn to keep my guard up. As we spoke, Sam made his way over. I looked at my hands as they gleamed. I wonder if... I thought aloud. I took a deep breath. I locked in, aiming to mimic the gravitational pull technique, but before I could, Pete's hand came down hard on my shoulder.
I'm not one to shun exploration, but seeing as the last time you copied a vert ability your brain broke down, you should probably refrain from intentionally absorbing any ability, at least until you can do it without hurting yourself, he jabbed.
I rolled my eyes, agreeing with a nod. Okay, Jacob, I jabbed, powering down.
Better safe than sorry, he replied. Besides, I'd rather not defend against my own attacks.
I chuckled to myself. It was so much fun to be around Pete again. With the weight of everything, I found it hard to relax and have fun with my situation. He had that effect on me. He kept me level-headed. Up for another round? I asked, getting ready.
Yeah, I want to join in too,
Sam added. We agreed, motioning for him to come over as we all readied our stances. I watched Sam anticipating an attack almost immediately. He had the patience of a York Terrier. My true focus was on Pete. I couldn't let my guard down. I had to pick my openings carefully. I had to use any cue against him. I now knew he could be baiting me the entire time, so I had to be patient with my attacks.
All right, here I come,
Sam screamed, leaping into action. He was reckless as usual. He was a lot faster than the last time we matched up. I leaped into the air to avoid having to block his attacks head on. As I soared in the air, I was met by Pete. I was caught off guard by the covering of a shadowy presence. I looked up to see a large hand coming toward me. It was Pete's. He had used subatomics to stretch it as big as a bed mattress.
Crap! Ah!
I braced with a full block as his hand collided with me, sending me hurling back to the ground.
Gotcha!
He screamed, nailing me. How could he have gotten by me? I had been tracking him the whole time and I never saw him move. His time manipulation was lethal. It was almost impossible to counter him without masking my moves. His blow, though it was a direct hit, didn't get around my full block. The momentum of his strike was still enough to send me crashing back down to the beach.
Don't forget about me,
Sam replied, crashing into Pete.
Boing!
Pete vibrated like jello as Sam bounced off him like a beach ball. It was futile. His body was his biggest asset. It was hard enough to counter his time manipulation, but with his body, even if you did somehow get around his time and space art, Pete never dropped his guard. His body was never really vulnerable. He had me stymied.
Not so fast, Sammy,
he replied, emitting a gravitational push that sent an already hurtling Sam flying hard toward the beach below. I didn't know how to capitalize, but I was going to use everything at my disposal. I seized the opportunity. I ricocheted off the ground and charged toward him yet again. Elements Gamma and Epsilon, Earth and Fire Command, White Flame, Crystal Spurs, I commanded. I exhaled, sending a roaring flame toward Pete as he reached to shield himself. I let loose with the second part of my attack, sending spurs toward him. The flames shielded his vision long enough. He didn't have a chance to block as the spurs collided against his arm. I used the borrowed power I mimicked from Uriah and covered ground by pausing time just slightly. I wanted it to appear as my own speed and used the time manipulation at the most opportune time.
I gotcha, I replied, charging at him. I hesitated as the smoke dispersed, revealing his metallic skin. The guy was unreal. It was almost impossible to form an attack strategy with him changing his body at will. His defense was ideal against my fire and earth style elements, but I knew it had to have its weakness. I zoomed in using my newfound optical ability, and that's where I saw it. There was a weakness. His joints were stiff. He couldn't move as well. I knew if I could somehow get him turned in one direction, it would be almost impossible to block from his weak spot. Big mistake, Pete, I gloated. I charged him with a direct attack, getting him to turn in a set direction. As he brought up his arms to block, I dematerialized and went right through him. I quickly materialized in his blind spot. It was perfect. I closed my eyes and clenched my fist, using everything I had to halt time. I opened my eyes and was surprised to see everything had halted. I wasted no time. Before he realized my strategy, I struck him with a flying knee that sent him soaring across the sand into the water. "No way!" he let out just before I collided with the side of his head. I stood proudly standing on the beach as he peeled himself off the ground, as his metallic skin slowly returned to normal. His uniform was soaked. He made his way out of the water, mumbling in frustration. "Man, Tim," he replied, "I thought I had you." I chuckled to myself arrogantly. A subtle move of the wind tipped me off. I slowed time long enough for me to catch Sam in the corner of my eye. "Don't forget about me," he blurted out, recklessly attacking my blind spot. As fast as he was, there was no method to his madness. He had no tact, no angle. He just swung wildly, hoping to hit something. I easily dodged and blocked every attack he threw. I could have easily taken him out, but a part of me felt like I had done enough damage to the kid. I flipped backwards, sending both of my feet under his armpits. I let my momentum carry me into a pile-driving motion. I slammed him hard into the ground before rebounding to catch my balance. I had slammed him so hard, his head and shoulders were buried in the sand like an ostrich. I felt invincible. I arrogantly smiled as I flipped high into the air and landed in attack stance. My speed and reflexes were unworldly. Throw in my time manipulation to slow things down to boot, it was just unfair. Every move, every strategy seemed to come to me without thought. I was a natural fighter. I was born to fight. "Man, I almost had you," Sam replied, pulling his head out of the ground. Before I could rebut, Pete charged me riding on a wave like a surfer. "Element Beta Typhoon Wave," he commanded, making the wave even larger. I composed myself as the tidal wave towered over me. I played every scenario over in my mind. I was like a machine. I deducted and reasoned strategy after strategy, trying to come up with the accurate counterattack. "Element Beta, Glacier Shock," I commanded. As I spoke, I slammed my fist into the ground, sending a ripple effect toward him. My eyes lit up as I gained control of the water. I let out a cold wind as the water turned into solid ice. The sudden tremor mixed with the element change sent Pete tumbling forward, landing inches in front of me. I smiled as I towered over him with my arms crossed confidently. "Come on, Pete, you can't use elements against an elemental," I replied, bending over to help him up. "We own the elements." As I reached to help him up, he morphed. He liquefied his body, dissipating right in front of me. He baited me again. I turned to prepare for an attack, but I couldn't move. It was like I was standing in superglue. "And never use the laws against a vert," Pete let out from behind me. I turned to reply, but the stuff was so strong I was stuck. "What is this stuff?" I replied, still trying to force myself free. He walked in front of me, smiling from ear to ear. "It's a mix between spiderweb, honey, and glue," he replied. With a wave of his hand, the material turned back into water. "Man, this stuff is hard to keep up with," I replied, plopping down.
He furrowed his brow before laughing to himself.
It's not so hard,
Pete replied, helping me up.
That's easy for you to say,
Sam objected, shaking the dirt out of his hair.
With this vert, L, Dom, elemental, meta whatsy is annoying.
I turned before shaking my head, frustrated. I had things under control, but I got confident. If I wasn't so arrogant, I wouldn't have taken such obvious bait. I was kicking myself for letting my guard down.
Well, it's because of the way you guys approach battles. You think of each class separately and base your attack on the strengths and weakness of a class. That complicates things. There are too many variations within classes. Your approach is too generic,
Pete explained. Elements Delta and Gamma heat vacuum, I commanded. The wind became thick with heat and whirled around me like a tornado until my soaked uniform was completely dry.
A little help, please?
Pete asked, walking into the tornado dryer. I aided him, still controlling the wind long enough to make sure he was completely dry. Anyways, Pete, that's a lot harder said than done, I complained. I moved my hand as the tornado disappeared.
Yeah, that's easy for you to say. You're a nerd,
Sam blurted.
How are we supposed to know how to do that?
Pete stared at me, pleading for the chance to lay into him. I shook my head empathetically.
It's not about knowledge,
he instructed, frustrated.
Look, you control something in a battle, even if it's just your emotions. Maximize the things you can control. You control the elements. Make them work to your advantage. If you make them dense or violent enough, it doesn't matter if a person is a Dom, Vert, or an L. It's going to be hard for them to fight. This gives you home field advantage on any terrain. Yet you guys never even thought to do that. A Vert is best when we understand our surroundings. We thrive on law makeup and adapting them to the techniques we use. Unless we're left guessing about the makeup and dimensions of the environment, we're going to manipulate and change them at will. Also, don't base your strategy on the person that you're fighting alone. Have techniques that will make it hard on them regardless of who they are. Tim, you rely too much on counterattacking. It works when you easily outmatch your opponent, but the longer the battle goes on, the more it becomes a liability. If I know you're reacting to everything I do, it's an advantage because I can control your movements and reactions. With that power, I can bait you easily. Sam, you rely almost completely on your physical skills. What's the point of learning all the techniques you do if you don't use them in battle?
I gave a nod, unable to disagree with anything he said. Sam shrugged, signaling he agreed as well. How could we? It was the truth. I prided myself on being able to pick apart the opposition's strategy. I never realized that ability was leaving me vulnerable. Now every move Pete performed made sense. He opened himself up to my attacks to lull me into a false sense of security. It was all to get me exactly where he wanted me. It was genius. How do you do that? I asked. You, Uriah? That thing where you analyze things so quickly. How do you do that? He looked at me with a puzzled look on his face.
I don't know. Why are you so naturally talented? Why does Sam work so hard?
He replied, shrugging his shoulders.
It's who we are. God blesses us all with gifts, and FYI, it may seem like Uriah and I are similar, but we're not. There's a subtle difference. I focus more on the consistency and inconsistency of my opponent's battle strategy. Yu spends more time on the overall mindset of his opponent. He focuses on favorable outcomes from the presented flaws or habits of his opponent. Like I said, the difference is subtle, but the strategy is completely different. His strategy is a little more advanced.
I agreed, nodding in approval. I looked over at Sam. He still seemed confused. I guess I never thought of it that way, I replied, rising to my feet.
Yeah, me either,
Sam replied. You guys want to go one more time? I asked, getting in fighting stance. Sam glanced over at Pete with a smile. He offered a helping hand, pulling him to his feet.
Sure, we could use the practice,
Pete agreed. I was enjoying myself for the first time in a long time. I felt like a kid playing with his friends again. We continued to spar, but not nearly as intensely as we did in the beginning. It was helpful. We walked each other through techniques and tips that we thought could be useful in the trials. They were mostly wasted on Sam, who had the hardest time understanding the most basic instructions, but I felt he was better off than when he began.
Do you guys think I'm getting better?
He uttered, wiping his brow with his forearm. I looked to Pete, who dropped to a knee, exhausted. We sat back to back, leaning on each other. We were wiped, but Sam was as giddy as ever, bounding from foot to foot shadowboxing.
Well, yeah, you're better, but if your natural element is light, then why don't you use it more often?
Pete questioned, nudging me for backup. He was right. I was wondering the same thing myself. He had taken Pete's advice and threw a few elemental techniques into his attack, but his most useful element was light energy. For some reason, he rarely used it, and even when he did, it was tame, as if he was holding back. Yeah, even when you do use it, you hold back, I responded.
Yeah, I know. I'm scared I'm going to lose control again,
he responded coyly, looking away as if to be hiding something.
You mean you're afraid of that weird flame?
Pete added.
Yeah,
he responded, finally falling flat on his back, resting. I was going to press things, but I didn't want Sam to feel like he was in a therapy session again. I could tell there was something he wasn't telling us, but Pete seemed oblivious to it. I figured I'd just let it go.
Hey, you guys in here?
Said a voice as the room morphed back to its previous form. Yeah, we're in here, Jade, I replied, recognizing his voice. We struggled to our feet and headed toward the front. As I turned the corner, I was surprised to see Jade in a stuffy suit. I sulked, annoyed by the implications. It seemed like it was days ago I was worried about being on display for homecoming, and even though this time I would be a part of the main attraction, I still wasn't overly excited about being put on parade for the entire Heaven realm.
What's with the threads?
Sam spouted, falling on the couch.
Threads?
Jade replied, with a curious look on his face. He means your clothes, I replied. He dusted off his clothing before turning to answer.
Oh, well, no, he replied. This is for the hosts. Your threads are in your rooms?
Jade, that's not what we... Forget it, I replied, too exhausted to explain.
If you don't mind me saying, you don't act like the rest of your angel pals, Pete added.
Jade wore a naive expression. He shoved his hands in his pockets in another failing attempt to be cool. He looked like a nerd with a stomach ache.
Well, as I explained to Tim, Sam, and Eve, I don't really have much experience with humans, so everything is new to me. The rest of my colleagues have more experience, so they may seem more comfortable and even assertive to an extent. I'm still learning the mannerisms and endearing nature of the human spirit, so I may be a little reserved in my own mannerism, he responded. Got it, Pete answered.
So, where are we going? I asked, grabbing a towel off a nearby rack. I was sweating like a pig. I lifted my arms to check my stench. The odor was bearable. I placed the towel in my armpit and flopped on the couch. It was a breathing leather. I melted as I stretched out on it. It was the softest couch I had ever been on.
Well, it's the trial agenda from here on out. You'll start with orientation. From there, you'll have your post-orientation press conference. When all that's done, you guys will have a chance to let off some tension at the pre-trial festival to end your first day, he explained. I nodded my head, acknowledging his response, even though I had no idea what he was saying. Before I could question him, Sam took the words out of my mouth. What's the pre-trial festival?
He inquired. He made his way to the couch I was sitting on and plopped down next to me. He was drinking a sports drink while drying off his sweaty hair. Jade touched up his tux before answering.
I don't have a lot of knowledge with your culture, so I don't have a lot to compare it to, but I guess the closest thing to it would be a party? I think is what you call it, he explained. It's a celebration of sorts, a chance for the trial prospects to get a chance to meet and let off some steam before the trials begin.
I cringed at the thought. I was hopeless at parties. I spent the majority of the time against the wall clock watching, and that was in the normal world. Judging by the reception we got at check-in, I'll be surprised if we make it through the night in this realm. I sighed deeply. Pete recognized my tone as he made his way over. He plopped down, joining Sam and me on the couch.
"Still have that hatred of parties, I see," he replied.
"You know it," I replied. "Maybe I can get Beth to transform into me and I can come back here."
"Yeah, that would have probably been a good idea. You know, if she didn't have to be there with you and they didn't have light signature security," Pete jabbed.
"Oh, yeah. Well, is there a way to subatomically place me there?" I replied.
"Tim, it'll be fun," Jade intervened. "It was a blast for me, and I'm sure you'll love it too. You really get a chance to meet the different prospects, and I gained a lot of long-time friends."
I raised my brow at the notion. I sat up, pessimistic in my reply. "Was your legion hated by the entire trial pool?" I asked sarcastically.
"Well, no," he replied.
"Don't you think that changes things between us? I don't know, just a little bit?" I said, patronizing him. This is going to suck so hard.
"Well, I'm sure everyone doesn't hate you guys," he replied.
"Thanks, Jade, that was really convincing," Pete added. "I'm looking forward to it," Sam said, retorting. "I can't wait to mop the floor with the snobby losers." I shook my head. Sam was about as up for this party as I was. Considering he was a SOC and would probably be treated the worst out of all of us, I find it real hard to believe he was excited about the opportunity to spend a night with the Heaven Realm gang.
"No, that is strictly forbidden. There will be no fighting of any kind, or the entire Legion will be disqualified," Jade warned.
"Well then, I know I'm going to hate it," I replied. Jade gave me a cynical glare before checking his watch.
"Okay, it's time to get dressed," he ordered, still looking at his watch. "Come on, your outfits are in your room. I'm going to go meet up with the other hosts, then I'll be back to get you guys in about 10 or 15 minutes.
I scraped myself off the couch. Sam raised his hand, begging for assistance. I helped him to his feet as Jade waited impatiently.
"Your rooms are upstairs. They're not portal doors, they're just rooms, but they're extremely elegant rooms," he explained, pointing at the stairs. "Go ahead and head up. I'll be back in a couple of minutes."
We headed toward the stairs. They were beautiful. They were made of a pure, transparent, crystal-like material, aside from the banisters, which were pure gold. I dragged my feet over the marble floors. I turned to see Jade just as he disappeared out the door. "Come on, Tim, let's go," Sam demanded, lightly shoving me.
"Yeah, I want to see those rooms,"
Pete seconded. Yeah, I acknowledged, jogging up the stairs. I stopped as I hit the next floor. It was amazing. The hall was littered with portraits and statues. I walked through the hallway, running my fingers along the plaques and award cases.
"I guess we weren't the first prospects to stay here," Pete added, pointing at the row of pictures. "And that would be cool if we actually knew any of these people."
I laughed out loud as Sam stared at one of the pictures. He wore an ambiguous frown before turning to us. "This guy kind of looks like Pete," he said, pointing at the picture with a slight tilt of his head. "Really?" I added, jogging over to him. "Wow, he kind of looks like your dad. Wait a minute, it is. It's your dad, it's Mr. Selly." Pete's eyes lit up as he marched over to us. He stared at it before covering his mouth, hiding a chuckling smile.
"Oh my gosh, it's my dad!"
Pete gushed, flabbergasted.
"This is crazy. I wonder what this means."
"Well, the headboard says memorable occupants," I replied. Sam walked up to the engraving on the picture.
"Philip Selly, occupant from Cycle Theta, blah blah blah, member of the highly decorated Theta Alpha Trial Legion." "Wow, so that's our parents' legion, the Theta Alpha Legion," he said.
"Well, we can ask Jade about it later, but for now, let's get dressed before he comes back raising the dead," I replied, trying to be the responsible one for once in my life. They both turned to me with a nod and headed toward their room doors. I was actually getting used to the technology. So much so that I didn't even flinch as the doors swung open, revealing a beautiful suite. To be honest, it was common in comparison to the rooms I had seen in the realm before. I walked over to the small closet and pulled down a tux. It was fancier than the tux I wore when we first arrived in the Heaven Realm, even before I put it through the ringer sparring. I pulled off my current beat-up tux before catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I was cut like a butcher. It was still thin for my liking, but there was definite progress. I walked in the bathroom and grabbed a foreign toothbrush. It was all gold with bristles that looked like many white strands of crystal. I ran my finger across the top of them before turning on the faucet. The water was as clear as glass. I wet the toothbrush and began to brush.
"Tim,"
said a voice, catching me off guard. "Yeah?" I replied, placing my finger in my ear to focus so that I could answer the BAU. "Who is this?"
"It's me, Jade. I was letting you know that we were meeting downstairs at check-in in 10 minutes, he instructed.
"Yeah, okay," I replied, grabbing a towel and heading for the shower. It was amazing how easy life was here. It was literally a utopia. The advanced communication and technology made life so easy. Even though we spent the better part of our time in our suite training, you would never know. The sweat that emitted from my body smelled like vanilla-scented deodorant. I was more taking a bath because I was a creature of habit more than anything.
"Okay, see you downstairs," Jade replied, signing off.
I stepped into the marble shower as an interactive dial scanned me up and down. The holographic panel spent like a pie graph before the words 85 degrees showed on the screen. Finally, a stream of water shot from every port in the roof of the shower like rain. It was the perfect temperature. I stood still as knobs, digits, and hoses appeared from different areas, shooting, soaping me up, and cleaning every part of my body before the water rained down once again to rinse me off. I felt like a car in a car wash as the wind began to blow like a cyclone, drying off every drop of water. "Wash complete," said the shower as the shower door opened. I stepped out onto the floor and stared at the mirror as the holographic interface appeared once again. The pie chart-like graph spent before prompting me to step forward. As I stepped forward, it began to materialize a suit on my body that was better than anything I could have chosen for myself. I stared in the mirror, blown away by my appearance. I was brimming with confidence as I walked out of the bathroom and headed for the door. I was on cloud 9. I never had to so much as straighten my tie. My suit was like it was painted on. I was beyond impressed. But like I said before, I was getting so used to the heavenly realm and its perks, I was beginning to wonder if I was becoming spoiled. But I thought it better to just enjoy it while times were good. I grabbed my bag off the bed and headed out into the hallway. From the look of things, Pete and Sam had gone ahead. I lightly jogged down the stairs and headed for the front door. I took one last look around the suite before heading out. It was ironic that everything in it looked so neat and perfect after the mayhem we caused in it. Little did I know, the Heaven Realm was strikingly similar in its overall appearance and ambiance, and likewise, I couldn't have foreseen what turned out to be one of the most trying nights of my afterlife.